Good evening, dear friends. Thank you for joining me on this first Sunday in John's Tide 2020. We'll be looking at John the Baptizer through the eyes and the words of John the Evangelist. It's definitely a renewing impulse that came with the creation of the Christian community in 1922 and the years afterwards, in which the idea of a festival tide came into being. There's always been Easter tide, Christmas tide, but for some of the other major events, such as John the Baptizer, there was not necessarily a season to celebrate. And so it was part of the vision that Rudolf Steiner had for the Christian community that there should be not only festival days with a special emphasis on a particular spiritual being or human being, but also festival tides. And the festival tide of John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, similar to that of Michaelmas, is new in the Christian calendar. And so we count from June 24th on 4 Sundays with the week afterwards, or 4 weeks if June 24th falls on a Sunday. Then we have John's Tide, 4 weeks in which we can intensely contemplate this being, this human being, in which we can also hear the particular liturgy that is given to the Christian community. I hope to talk some about that in one of the next contemplations about our liturgy. Today, looking through the eyes of the Gospel of John, it can be a little confusing. We have John, who baptized, and we have John, who wrote the Gospel, also wrote the Apocalypse or the Revelation to John, and also wrote the letters of John. So I'll try to remember to say John the Baptizer and John the Evangelist, depending on which one I'm talking about. John the Evangelist, the beloved disciple. Today, if we're going to work with the Gospel of John, we always have to bring to consciousness the fact that this gospel begins with those magnificent cosmic words, "In beginning was the Word, and the Word was turned towards God, and God was the Word. This was turned towards God in the beginning. All things came into being through the Word, and nothing of all that was created came into being in any other way than through the Word. In the Word was life, and the life was the light for human beings. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And then the gospel takes a deep breath. After these sparing words, which do describe eons and eons of creative activity by the Creator, by the creative word, the Logos, one can have the impression that all of creation takes a deep, deep breath before the next words are spoken. Egenito anthropos. There came into being a human. Difficult to translate. 2 simple words in Greek, egenito anthropos. In the egenito we hear the genesis, the creation, the creative impulse, creative activity. Anthropos is the human being. And it may seem if you were just reading this as a novel or a poem, it would be a bit of a jump. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And there came into existence a human being. If we make a prosaic piece of prose out of it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One needs this deep breath of spiritual activity, which can help us feel our way into the magnificence, into the weight of these words, which are not just words. I like to say they're a kind of living being. We go from the word was life, the life was the light for human beings, the light shines in the darkness, all kind of abstract things. Word, light, life, immaterial, existing, but not something you can grab a hold of. Then we hear egeneto anthropos. There came into existence a human being. It's a lot of English words we need to describe this monumental moment. The first indication, at least in the Gospel of John, the first indication that something, someone, some entity is coming into existence that will become a material being, a physical being, a human being, an anthropos. A being that will apparently have something to do with this darkness where the light is shining. And we can easily see that the material world is a form of darkness. Not darkness in the moralistic sense of bad, evil, but dark in the sense of dense, of impermeable, not something that the light easily shines through. If I look at my solid teakwood table, where my telephone is standing on right now, it's solid. The light does not shine through the teakwood table. But the light can act differently within the being of a human. In the human being, the light can enter. It can enter through our eye. The light can enter through our understanding. The light can enter through our feeling. The light can enter our thinking. The light can work in us. The light can work through the material, the physical part of our being, and even transform it. And of course, the light doesn't just work on us and we sit there and do nothing. It doesn't work that way, dear friends. That would be much too easy. Those would be maybe the old days of the ancient initiations. The modern path of spiritual activity requires my participation, my openness. And in a way, every time I open myself to the light, whether it be the light of understanding, the light of perception, the light of empathy, I'm always connecting with that primordial impulse that went forth in the beginning, which activated the logos, the creative word. And that creative word comes to us through the human being. Egeneto anthropos. There came into existence a human being. And now this human being will be described. A human being sent by God. Again, simple words that we could just say, oh, sent by God, of course, sent. Wonderful, wonderful. But stop and feel your way into that little phrase for a moment. Sent by God. God, if we think of, as I've described a few times, that being that holds the entire universe in its, let's say, in its hands, in its circumference. God. When God does something, it's not a trivial matter. It's a matter that actually involves all of that encompassing, all that God holds in his being is then involved in whatever it is that this being does. And when we say there came into existence a human being sent by God, this is not just you or I, although who knows? But in this case, sent by God, ordained, as it were, by the highest, most powerful creative instance, sent by God, its name, Ioannis, John. Greek, Ioannis. Hebrew, Yochanan. Now, who is this anthropos, this human being? Are we speaking of the purely historical John the Baptizer, about whom everyone knows? He entered the Jordan. Jesus entered the Jordan. He was baptized. He preached, yelled at people, ultimately beheaded. Yes, it's the historical John the Baptizer. It's also, I feel, something of the primordial human being, perhaps the first manifestation of a human being in creation. The Gospel of John does not write, and then John the Baptist began preaching in the wilderness. We can read that by Mark, Matthew, Luke. They look very much from the human side of things, you might say. Whereas John the Evangelist looks much more from this cosmic aspect, as indicated in the beginning of our contemplation. When we go to these great, magnificent, monumental words in the beginning, and the Word was life, and the life was the light for human beings, and so on. You almost have to say everything in this gospel is going to be a part of this great cosmic drama that is playing out as God, as that all-encompassing being, slowly pulls himself together, contracts to become human. That's coming, don't worry. But for now, let's say there came into existence a human being. Both. Let's try to expand our imagination in such a way that we can say, this is John, the historical baptizer. This is also John, the primordial human being. The human being. Both. So we might say the Gospel of John describes this anthropos, this human being named John, in a historic role, but also in a cosmic role. And in both of these, we can say he is witness to the light. So the Gospel of John continues. He was not the light. He came to bear witness to the light so that all may believe. Now we're talking all before the Christ has appeared on the earth. John may be living in a time frame at this point, John the Evangelist with his story, may be living in a time frame before Jesus of Nazareth was born. We have to go back and forth in time between this primordial creation and the here and now of the time around the life of Jesus and John the Baptizer and so on. So try to keep both of these aspects in mind, that we're always talking about the cosmic picture, and at the same time, we have the earthly focus of this one unbelievably powerful and deep and rich human being, John the Baptizer. The gospel itself swings back and forth between the cosmic and the human, between John the Baptizer and the Logos, or the Christ. Egenito anthropos, the true light, his own. So the true light was in the world. The world had become through the light, but people had not recognized it. There were, however, some, the idia, we have our word idiot from that, which doesn't mean stupid and dumb, but means its own person. There were these idia, these own beings, who I would like to say were prepared through the centuries, through the eons. They are born, not of the blood, not of the will of a man, not of the will of the flesh. They were born of God, these idia, these own beings. They experienced a birth in themselves that was completely unrelated to their physical being, to their particular incarnation in any lifetime. They carry a birth, you might say a birth potential with them into each incarnation in order to serve the divine, in order to become part of the cohort of the Logos. Perhaps some of these people had received the baptism of John in the Jordan and were purified, were awakened for their potential, and realized who they were. We'll get to that maybe next time or the time after, as we go through this first chapter of the Gospel of John. These are, in any case, his own. He goes to them. Some accept him, some reject him. Those who do accept him, they receive power to become children of God, to become servants of the Most High in this particular lifetime. And then I feel like the gospel takes another deep, deep breath. Kai hologos sarx egenito. There we have it again, egenito. Hear that word? Always this ongoing process, this ongoing becoming, this ongoing genesis of humanity. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Or you might say, literally, put up its tents in us. Possible translation. Created a scene. You have the ensenium in the theater, the framework for the play. It's another way to translate this verb. It's often said that the baptism by John in the Jordan is not explicitly described in the Gospel of John. I would agree with that to a certain extent. At the same time, I feel like this particular picture, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, is exactly that. Describing from a different point of view the baptism in the Jordan. When you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, you will see the baptism described from the point of view perhaps of John himself, perhaps Matthew as a witness, Luke who heard the story from others, Mark who also heard the story from others, John who may have been there in his previous role as Lazarus. We don't know any of those things. We don't know exactly who was present at the many, many baptisms that John performed in the Jordan. But those descriptions describe beautifully the outer circumstances. Jesus coming to John, entering the water, John refusing at first, and then acquiescing, the baptism, the descent of the Holy Spirit, which came and remained as a dove. It's all there. These are the pictures most of us live with. But these brief words of John, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, describes, I've come to see the baptism of Christ, of Jesus, the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan, through which the Christ being was able to descend into an earthly body and to become a part of an earthly body. Imagine all of the hierarchical beings, from the angels all the way up to the Trinity, to the Father himself, to the seraphim and the cherubim and the thrones, and on, all following the course of this Logos Creator, the Son of God. As he descends, contracts into the earthly world and becomes a part of one human being, Jesus of Nazareth. The Word becomes flesh and dwells among us. John here again is performing the baptism. He's also witness. He sees what happens. He sees the Spirit descending as a dove. We'll come to that next time. He knows now that he has Messiah in front of him. And then he's able to go on and say, this is the one of whom I said, he's the one. He was here before me. He's the one that I've been telling you about. Now he's here, right here in front of us. And so John becomes, in this monumental act of baptism, the portal through which the eternal Logos, the Word of God, enters not in an abstract or intellectual manner, but enters into the existential sphere of the human being. You, I, all of us. That was the human being. And of course, the whole time that comes after that is the working out of this Word becoming flesh. It's the continual transformation of the human being. It's the meeting with all of the distress, the pain, the suffering of all humanity, until that moment on the cross when John the evangelist stands next to Jesus and witnesses his death. Whether they had all of that particularly in mind at this moment of the baptism, it's hard to say. But what is clear is that John recognized at this moment, this is the one-born Son of God. This is the one who is born not of the flesh, not of the blood, not of the will of a man, but born of God. And this is the one who calls each of us to strive for that birth in our own lives. Dear friends, thank you for listening. Next time I want to move on through this first chapter of the Gospel of John. It's a very powerful, very moving, and I have to say one of the dearest to my own heart of the Gospels and of the pictures, this being John, the Baptizer. I wish you a fine Sunday evening. Stay safe, stay sane, do what you need to do, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you for listening.